Paul that he was the final runner. If he wanted to finish, he would need to begin his descent immediately. Paul nodded. He was determined to cross that finish line. The timing crew descended ahead of him, leaving Paul alone at the summit. They turned back once to see him pausing, catching his breath before he started down. That was the last time anyone saw Paul Lamont. When the timing crew reached the bottom, they waited. Surely Paul would appear soon, following the well-marked path as everyone else had. But the minutes dragged on and Paul never arrived. Worried, the crew informed race officials and Paul's family, assuring them they'd seen him at the top, seemingly fine. They suggested waiting another hour or so before calling for help. As darkness crept in and a thick fog rolled over the mountain, Paul's family decided they couldn't wait any longer. They notified the authorities, and a search was launched. What followed was a frantic, exhaustive search that stretched through the night and into the next day. Dozens of seasoned Alaskan search and rescue personnel, joined by tracking dogs and helicopters equipped with thermal imaging, scoured the mountain. They combed the marked trail, the unmarked ridges, and even the sheer, dangerous backside of the mountain, terrain that would have been nearly impossible for Paul to reach, let alone traverse. But despite their tireless efforts, they found nothing. Not a single footprint, not a shred of clothing, not even a dropped water bottle. After 4 days, the search was called off. The mountain fell silent once more. Paul Lamont had vanished into thin air, leaving behind nothing but unanswered questions and a chilling sense of unease. How could an experienced runner disappear so completely on a well-traveled trail during a public event? To this day, no one has found a single trace of Paul, and his disappearance remains one of the most puzzling and haunting mysteries in the history of the Mount Marathon race. It was a cool, crisp morning in August of 2004 when Kevin Barsley and his 12-year-old son, Garrett, joined their Boy Scout troop on a camping trip deep in the untamed Uinta Mountains of northern Utah. Their destination was Lake Cubrant, a remote and mysterious body of water hidden among towering peaks and shadowed by dense forests. Just getting to the lake was a challenge. The group had to navigate a treacherous trail that wound past 7 smaller lakes, each more isolated than the last. By the time they reached their campsite, they were more than an hour's hike from the nearest sign of civilization. The father and son woke early that morning, eager to enjoy the serenity of the lake before the others stirred. They quietly slipped out of their tents, grabbed their fishing gear, and made their way down the narrow 150-meter trail that led to the water's edge. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting an eerie orange glow on the still surface of the lake. It was a scene of perfect tranquility, but the day's events would soon turn it into something else entirely. A haunting nightmare that would remain etched in the minds of all who were there. As Kevin prepared the fishing lines, Garrett busied himself hopping from rock to rock, testing his balance and laughing as he went. But then, with a sudden splash, he slipped and tumbled into the frigid water. Garrett quickly pulled himself out, soaked from the waist down, laughing off his clumsy misstep. "I'll fish like this," he told his dad, brushing off Kevin's concern. "I'll change later." But after several minutes of casting their lines with no bites, Garrett began to shiver. "Okay, I'll go change now," he said. Kevin nodded, telling his son to go back to the campsite and change into dry clothes. He watched as Garrett walked up the trail, disappearing into the dense line of trees that surrounded the lake. The sounds of the camp beginning to stir drifted faintly through the air, reassuring Kevin that Garrett wouldn't be alone for long. Still, Kevin glanced over his shoulder from time to time, expecting to see his son return. He never did. 20 minutes passed, then 30. Kevin's stomach tightened with worry. Leaving his fishing gear behind, he started up the trail toward the campsite. When he arrived, the other boys and their fathers were awake, chatting and eating breakfast. But there was no sign of Garrett. Kevin checked his son's tent, but it was empty. The wet clothes Garrett was supposed to change out of were nowhere to be found. Panic began to seep into Kevin's voice as he called out to the group. "Has anyone seen Garrett? He should be here by now." But no one had seen the boy. Kevin's pulse quickened. He bolted back down the trail, calling his son's name at the top of his lungs. The other campers followed close behind, their shouts filling the cold mountain air. Soon, local authorities, search and rescue teams, and even the FBI were on site. They scoured the area for any sign of Garrett. Hours later, searchers stumbled upon a clue, a single Nike sock wedged between two rocks about half a mile from where Garrett had last been seen. His mother confirmed that it belonged to him. The discovery shifted the search to a sprawling boulder field, its jagged rocks casting ominous shadows as the sun dipped lower in the sky. But the sock would be the only trace of Garrett they ever found. Days turned into nights, and the search stretched on with helicopters, dogs, and teams of experienced trackers combing every inch of the wilderness. Yet there were no footprints, no torn pieces of clothing, no signs of a struggle, nothing. Garrett's father replayed the events of that morning over and over in his mind. How could a boy get lost on such a short, well-defined trail? How could he vanish so completely, without a sound, without a trace? Theories emerged, each more unsettling than the last. Some whispered of a mountain lion dragging Garrett off into the dense woods. But there were no claw marks, no blood, no evidence of a violent encounter. Others speculated that he had become disoriented, wandering far from the trail and succumbing to the elements. But this explanation also seemed unlikely. Garrett was a bright, capable boy who knew the trail well and could hear the voices of his fellow campers. As the days passed, the wilderness grew eerily silent once more. The searchers eventually packed up their equipment and left. Kevin Bardsley returned to his tent, but his son's absence haunted him. To this day, Garrett's disappearance remains an enigma, a chilling reminder that in the heart of nature's beauty, unspeakable mysteries can unfold.